Hello and welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement podcast. My name is Katie Berlekamp and I'll be your host for today's conversation. And I'm so ecstatic and excited to welcome Karl Poulsen to the show. Karl is the Chief Procurement Officer at HISCOX and a provider of specialized insurance. Welcome to the show, Karl.
Hey, Katie, good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I am so excited since I've gotten to know you over the last year. Before we get into a little bit about your experience at Hiscox, I want to, talk about your professional background because you've been in procurement for a long time. You've also traversed industries in procurement, which that doesn't always happen for everybody. Somehow they land at one place, they land in procurement, and they spend 25, 30 years there. So you've had some good opportunities. If you want to talk about some of your experience, but also, are there similarities across the board? Are there differences? Where does procurement look different to you?
So, look, it's a great question, Katie, and it horribly ages me what I'm about to say, but I've been in procurement for about 20 years now in various companies. Actually, always in financial services, but in very different parts of financial services along that journey. And I had kind of about 10 years in banking before I went into procurement, before I saw the light and came into procurement. Look, I think the key fundamental similarity is it's very much a people business, right? Yeah, we buy stuff, goods, services, whatever. But the real part of it is understanding business strategy, understanding what stakeholders are trying to buy, and bridging that into the market, working out how you can make that market more competitive to unlock value, whether it's price, service, sustainability, whatever it is, how you can drive that in a much more efficient way. And obviously, as you kind of go through procurement and your journey within it, your seniority, it's about how you're leading the team, right? A huge amount of what I do is, it's important interaction with senior stakeholders, but it's leading my team, it's understanding what's important to my team, how we're working through our various plans, and also importantly, their development. How am I bringing on them as the next leaders of the future, as the next procurement professionals, and improving their game overall?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right about the people side of the business and especially when it comes to cultural change with adopting technology and adding new team members and scaling the organization. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more about how that's transpired at Hiscox? What have you done with your
Yeah,
team
sure. So,
recently?
yeah, I've been here about 3.5 years now, and in some ways that feels like 3.5 minutes, and in other ways, it feels like 3.5 decades. Right? We've done an awful lot in that time. Probably helpful if I just give you a bit of background, right? So very much when I arrived, this was a greenfield site. HISCOX is a federated business. We've got amazing business units in some regions of the globe, some of which are spanning the globe. Just depends on what they're focusing on. But prior to my arrival, procurement was very, very siloed in those business units, often done on the side of a desk by somebody who's trying their best, but sometimes wasn't a procurement professional. So the very first thing I did was just look at how things were at the moment, right? And then started with a simple hypothesis, was that if we concentrated that, we aligned it around categories and bought in categories rather than in silos, we'd just be able to leverage more, right? To the benefit of everybody. Now, that works on paper, it works in a spreadsheet. Starting to talking to stakeholders about it is where you really got to understand what's important to them, right? And in one level, a kind of, hey, I just have a chat with Bob who sat next to me, and Bob goes and done it, means that something gets done quickly, but it might not get done efficiently, right? And sometimes you've got to slow down a bit to go faster later on. I'm pleased to say that my colleagues actually saw the benefit of centralisation. We spent a lot of time on that. I spent time spinning the team up, and hey, we've all got challenges as leaders as to how we attract the best talent, right? And I'm fortunate we've done more than our fair share of that. We've got some great people in the team. And part of my sell to them was, this is a green field, largely, right? And there's not many opportunities in your career when you get to go into a green field. We are still 3.5 years in, often spoilt for choice, right? And that's great. We've got lots of things that we can be doing to add value, lots of things that we can be talking to stakeholders about. But another key part of that was technology. I knew there'd be limited appetite for spinning up a procurement team of tens and tens and tens of people to do this. We had to find a technology which not only would work, but crucially would drive productivity in the procurement cycle, and also put in a lot of controls, which clearly really feels like we didn't have many of those. That's a massive cultural change, Katie. And I spent a lot of my time we're still in the midst of rollout of this project. We decided to do it in various ways, thinking that it was such a change a big bang would not work. And I think that was a right decision. We also spent many months in advance deciding on exactly what our technology should be, understanding the pain points that business users and procurement professionals alike were feeling, mapping that into requirements, and as a cross-functional team, deciding what our technology vendor choice was going to be. And I was determined that we would do that as a wider team, right? And that's important, I think, for hugely significant reasons of getting buy-in early on to it, right? Everybody has different sorts of pain points. Everybody will perceive the technology as being slightly different. Frankly, the technology is not the key issue. It's the cultural change that is going to be important. We're very good at landing technology change projects. We've had bumps along the road. Everybody will have bumps along the road. It's how you react to that, but it's how you set the scene. Why is this important? How is it going to improve the business overall and colleagues' working experience, right? The user experience. And in parts of our rollout, we haven't got the user experience right? We're reflecting on that, how we can improve it further, listening to people. But I'm really proud of the way my team has faced into that, have supported colleagues on that journey. We've been running one-to-one clinic sessions, as well as doing things like quick videos on common transactions and so on to get that message out. But you never get that right. Constantly changing things, burning things more efficiently to really get to that optimal flow.
That's what we hear about, and that's actually what I was going to ask you about too. Is if you're bringing, technology adoption, but also teams together and making some of those cultural changes, but then you go through macro changes that we see at the current pace of like regulatory changes. What stands out to you as like most impactful to sourcing and procurement teams, especially yours, as you're working, to improve those areas?
Oh, look, I think the most impactful thing I've done here has been invest in my team, right? This has been a huge change for my team, right? And they've been very much the ambassadors of the change in terms of the S2P technology. And it was necessary for me really to invest in them as professionals. And that was a whole series of things that we did, principally around their professional development, stuff like negotiation, how we face into that, looking at how we work together, and so on. So that, I think, has been the most impactful thing I've done. But what that has meant has been that they have been great ambassadors for this change, right? We haven't always got it right. We occasionally, sometimes more than occasionally, make mistakes, right? But we use those mistakes as learning opportunities, and we take that out of it, and we move forward and try and improve things, right? So that investment's been absolutely fundamental. The next piece that we've done, very much hand in glove with that, was we've done things like learning styles are all very different, aren't they? Right? I've got 3,500 colleagues, and I probably have got 3,500 learning styles, but there are very different learning styles. So we were very conscious of that. So if you like detail, we've got amazing user guides on how to use the new technology, how you interface with that. If you don't like a lot of detail and you just want to watch something really quickly, we've got 60-second bite-sized videos on like how to raise a purchase requisition, as a for instance. But in addition to that, If you need a little bit more support, we've got the ability for colleagues, just to hold a hand up and say, look, I really appreciate 15 minutes just to walk through whatever it is. And I've got great colleagues in my team who invest that 15 minutes, half an hour with a colleague and walk them through that and really figuratively, virtually hold their hand through that process. And that last bit, that human touch, is what we get the best feedback on. And that is, that's really warming when I get those emails from people saying, hey, that's really great interaction with James, Pablo, Paul, whoever it was.
Yeah, Karl, I think I would call you the optimist of, the current changes, how fast they come on in our world today in terms of, geopolitics and other issues impacting sustainability and sourcing and procurement. That you guys are the more opportunistic. Like, every challenge is an opportunity. There's a silver lining throughout, every challenge that you guys face, and it's because you've worked so hard on that culture as a team.
This can be relentless, right? We are engaged in a transformation program across multiple years. I've got a relatively small team. There's about 20 of us. And we face into some challenging days as well, right? Not everything works first time. My colleagues give us amazing feedback, as in they share their opinions, and that's great, right? You want the unvarnished truth as to how people are feeling it, and then we look on that, we reflect on it, and do you know what? They're right some of the time. They're not right all of the time, and I think you've got to take that step back and go, do you know what? That's fair, right? We can do something with that. That's a really powerful observation. Other piece here, actually, there's another side to that perhaps they haven't seen, right? And we don't want to get bent out of shape on that, because there is just a bit of a risk you do that, right? You start knee jerking around the place. But we listen, we challenge ourselves on the feedback and how we can take that forward.
Yeah. With some of that feedback, what are some of the lessons that you've learned about transformation from working with your team at HISCOX? So just about the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So I think what I'd say is, I knew before we started that the biggest challenge here was cultural, right? We planned a whole cultural stream to our transformation, things like communications, developing training materials, and various different sorts of materials. And the biggest lesson I've learned is, don't associate silence with acceptance, right? Just because people aren't going, hey, this is really great, don't assume that it's really bad. And just because they're not saying, oh, this is really bad, don't assume that it's really great, right? You've got to be able to do that. The other piece is, there's a change curve, right? And people go through that change curves at different speeds, and very much based on volume of transactions that they're having to deal with, and so on. And I think sometimes we've assumed a sort of linear progression through that, rather than going, well, actually, this is going to be a bit related to how many times people use and utilize the system. And for us, my team, this is pretty much near the top of the things that we're always talking about, and our whole change program is almost our number one priority. I've got to accept that it's not the number one priority for the vast majority of my colleagues, right? It just isn't. So making this as easy and as straightforward as possible is absolutely what we're trying to do. But fundamentally, what we're doing here as well, Katie, is putting some discipline in a process, right, which wasn't there before. I.e., you raise a requisition, that goes on an approval journey. That can feel very, very jarring to people. So when we get feedback, I don't like this, I don't see why I've got to do it, that's valid, because it's how that person feels, and it's putting some extra steps in the process. But the organisation has taken a strategic decision, that's the way that we want to go, right? And there are very good value reasons why we do that. And all the way through this process, what we have absolutely been able to point to is our scorecard. And we are putting runs on the board. It's an English analogy. Hopefully it translates. We're having our successes. We're putting dollar bills back into the P&L, really in a very, very meaningful way. So we're showing all the time that this is working. That's really important. And I hope also that we're showing that we're listening and we're trying to refine some of the rough edges that are still out there as a result of that feedback.
Yeah. I think that feedback, those feedback loops are some of the things we've heard about from the top organizations who are really innovative with their procurement, right? And are much more proactive and on the innovation improvement with suppliers, and on the course of sustainability and risk management. Like, so that feedback has been valuable for them to move forward. So you've got both sides here. One where you identify, this is why the workflow or the approval or the process with the technology goes the way it goes. But you've also been receptive to feedback and changes in some way, going back to the technology along with the culture and the team.
Yeah, look,
go ahead.
That's absolutely right, and I'm really pleased that you reminded me, because I haven't spoken so far about the important part our suppliers play in this as well, right?
Yes.
It's really easy to concentrate on your colleagues and your team, right? The other fundamental part is how we bring suppliers on this change journey. And we're a relatively small company, right? We have not usually got the market muscle to do something that's totally revolutionary to the market, right? But the other advantage of putting an S2P system in 2025 is that we're not a first mover either, right? So the vast majority of our suppliers have something broadly similar with other clients that they're interacting with, right? And we know iValua is one of the market leaders in the segment, so the chances are they're interacting with iValua already. We have an MVP, minimum viable product mindset in our launch, so we've pretty much taken everything out of the box. So we haven't made it difficult to adopt, particularly if many of our supply partner colleagues already have iValua processes within them. And frankly, again, lessons learned here, we probably should have spent a bit more time talking with our suppliers around the benefits, because there are clear benefits for them in moving to a more automated system. Right, we've started to do that very much in the last few weeks, and hats off to the vast majority of my suppliers who've responded to that challenge. Right, we've explained the efficiencies that can be gained for them if they're able to interact with the portal in a certain sort of way, and so on. And those conversations have been highly productive. Now, of course, not everybody says yes, right? And I didn't expect them to, but it's very good, that we're getting that level of collaboration, and that's really pleasing to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I've talked to many people who have included their suppliers that early on in the process, and that's probably, probably a lot of people have had similar, misgivings of like, I should have included them earlier. We should start working on that relationship sooner, or identifying some of those key areas, topics, and suppliers sooner. What's paid off so far in dividends based on the work that you've done, like not just with suppliers, but maybe even on other areas of procurement, like contracting? Like, what's paid off dividends in workflows, approvals, and your team's ability to adapt?
Yeah, so what's paid massive dividends is our ability to use the sourcing elements of the system, right? So yeah, there's been productivity benefits in that. In some areas, there's been some disbenefits, right? But let's be clear. But overall, there's definitely been some benefits on that from a productivity standpoint. But because we're able to use that tooling more effectively, we have been driving better value. Now, that can be straightforward price arbitrage. It can be getting better sustainability outcomes, better service outcomes, all three of which are really important. And then there are some other things which, we also will have driven in that space. It also means that we just got the most amazing records as well compared to what we had before, which was trying to find something in a shared drive or a filing cabinet or something like that, right? So as and when we get challenges on, hey, what about this or that, we can go into the system, we can extract that really very quickly. Similarly, at a contract level, those contracts which are in the system, which is all the new stuff, for sure, people want to know terms or what it says about whatever. We can go in and we can find that really very quickly as well, and that's amazing speed which we have been able to do. So, for example, I'm just thinking what's been really shop window recently. There I mentioned the tariff word, right? There's been all sorts of queries about that, so we've been able to extract that data and show it. Similarly, we took the risk center from iValuer. Due diligence incredibly important to all the regulators and indeed to us as a business that we do due diligence effectively. We just now have the most amazing automated tooling for that due diligence. Now, it doesn't replace humans. There's still a lot of human brain power associated with that, and sometimes a bit of a negotiation creeps in as well, because our standard might be here, suppliers may be somewhere north or south of that. What do we think on it? And decisions have to be taken as a result. But we have all of that within the system, and we're able to automate things. So, for example, we do automated checking of bank account details to bear down on any potential fraud risks. We have credit referencing out of that, with sanctions checking, all of which are automated API calls out of the system, creating nice records and workflows for people to look at and go, yeah, I'm happy, no, I'm not, and see then subsequently, if they're not happy, driving appropriate actions as a result. So it has given us just the most amazing access to data in pretty much real time to be able to help with those decisioning points. And if you remember something I said a few minutes ago, we needed to invest so that we didn't end up employing a team of hundreds, right?
Yep.
And that's a really good area where we've scaled with relatively few resources, human resources, to be able to keep that level together. And we took a difficult decision as we launched. We had, again, part of our legacy of constantly doing things in silos. We had a supply chain of over 10,000 suppliers, right? The average supplier was billing us less than $1,000, right? So there was a lot of friction in the process, and working collaboratively across the business, we were able to slim that down to roughly 3,000. It's still too big, right? But that was a big step to be able to do that, to make the initial loading of the system way more manageable. And of course, we became a little bit more meaningful to most of our suppliers as a result of that. But yeah, that's very much work in progress, Katie.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, when you talk about automation, also, like, I'm glad that you mentioned it in terms of team members, time, resources. That's not always understood or measurable, or it's difficult to measure. So automation, you've included a lot of elements there. I think getting from 10,000 to 3,000 is huge. What do you think about AI, and how are you how are you integrating AI in with this automation, and where do you think it's going to provide the biggest value for you?
Yeah, look, it's a really great question, right? And there's a lot of focus on AI more generally, right? Now, because we've had a minimum viable project mindset, we have not deployed a lot of AI, right? And that was deliberate because of the scale of change. That comes in our next level of maturity. But I'll give you one example where we have been using some AI tooling. I briefly touched on it. Contract scanning, right? Trying to find various clauses within contracts and so on. That's been enabled, and we that has been useful for sure. Our next stage of iteration that I really do see some benefits in using AI on is part of the process of a colleague saying, "Hey, I want to use a new supplier." Now, that was clearly a big pain point. That's why we had 10,000 suppliers. Yep. A lot of that duplication was driven by colleagues just having a need, and adding a supplier was always quicker than checking what was on the roster. So AI has a great ability to showcase what we've already got, right? And the iValue intake form construct I think is really good. We're testing that at the moment. There's a lot of AI built into that, conscious of the user experience. My vision is Collie says, hey, I need this. And then we utilize the AI within the intake to go, well, have you thought about this, this, and this? Right? To really show them what the options are available right now. We don't need to onboard. We don't need to invest the time in onboarding if we've got options which are available right now. Now, the answer to that is, yeah, I thought about that, but I might want to do it. But hey, we've still given people the option. And I think that is really, really important. And what the automation to date has done, some of which is a little bit of AI, but not much in it, we've been able to reduce our cycle times. So the moment our onboarding from the start of the year is about, when I average it out, just under 30 days, which is pretty decent. But for the last 3 months, it's less than 20 days, right? And to give you an idea of how we're constantly iterating on that and looking at how we can improve things, we're looking at small segments and setting challenges. Hey, let's have a look at that end to end. What do we really need to do here? Do all these steps add value? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, or we re-engineer them, and so on. So the team is starting now as we're coming to the end of MVP in some of our locations. We're still to launch in others, but in some of our locations, we're starting to take those learnings and embed them in the system.
Yeah. I love talking about AI. Obviously, we're getting into the agents topic this year, and that was a huge topic at both iValue and Nows. But still, each organization is looking at adoption of AI-based support in different ways. So I like that you're looking at it maybe in a small segment, but end to end within that segment. Any advice that you might have for people that are going out there, that are looking at them in sort of smaller pieces, smaller, more digestible areas of improvement?
Yes. Yeah, I think my big advice would be don't expect too much too soon.
Okay.
Right. The key is that this has got to learn, it's got to train, it's got to be able to do that. So we have some AI built into our invoicing process, right? Where a supplier doesn't use our portal, right, or doesn't want to use our portal, we've got some AI built there that can help identify an invoice if it's from X and the layout of it, and therefore it's able to automate some of the processes. But it takes time to train that and for the automation to be fully effective. Now, part of that I think is understood, but it becomes particularly important to explain to colleagues, right? Because it can feel in the short term like a waste of time because you're investing time in trying to teach rather than in doing. I've taken half an hour to do this. It might only have taken me 10 minutes. Why am I doing this? So a lot of it is in the messaging to colleagues and the expectations around it. And also, frankly, with the integration partners you're working with or with iValue on, what are other people getting out of this, right? How are they seeing this? Are there collective learnings that we can take out of that? And one of the things I constantly say to my team and to my iValue colleagues when I meet them is, look, we're a minimum viable product. We're taking it out of the box. What are other people doing, right? How is this working elsewhere? Because if I don't have to reinvent the wheel, if I can take those learnings from somewhere else.
Yeah, but I agree. I think intelligence sharing is the name of the game, and the perspective definitely looks different across, analysts, customers, partners, industries, regions, and then what solution sets, modular activity, and capabilities within those. There's so much that people could be, looking at or digesting, or even groups that they're sharing intelligence with, and finding out who's doing what and whether there's an ability to take that on is really great information. Hoping we get to a place, all of us, where we're sharing more together.
I agree. And of course, there's all sorts of very important antitrust things, but I'm talking about stuff that's genuinely non-competitive around things like iValue again. Hey, most of our clients do this and so on. It's kind of anonymized, randomized, but those learnings are important to share.
Yeah. So I do, before I get towards the top of the hour here, I kind of want to ask a more like, if you were to take a look at what you're doing now holistically, like what does the digitization or journey of digital transformation, if you looked at it as a whole, where do you think you're at right now on the entire path, you and your team?
Oh wow, that is an amazing. That's an amazing question.
That's a hard question, but it's
And
done
I probably need to
purposefully.
sit down with a pen and a piece of paper and try and work it out. Look, let me act a bit like a politician and answer a slightly different question. If you said to
Perfect.
me on a scale of 1 to 10, where's our maturity at the moment? Now it varies a bit depending on geographic location because what we've rolled out at different stages. But in my most mature market, I probably say we're a 6 to a 7, right? When I blend it all out, there's definitely things we can do on user experience to improve things, and that will drive adoption even further. And
Yeah.
and of course, it's not as good as that in areas that are not as experienced. But in my most mature market,
Yeah.
Katie, this is week 22.
Right.
This is week 22. I keep on having to remind ourselves that is not a long time. Now, it
Right.
feels longer. Back to my earlier point about in some ways this feels like 3.5 minutes or 3.5 decades, but it is week 22. And
Yeah.
it just takes a bit of time to build this up for it to become muscle memory and so on. And back to insights, all of our key stats at the moment, whether that's on number of colleagues interacting, purchase orders, our sourcing events, our elapsed time, is roughly at the better end of average. Now, if you'd told me that 3 years ago when I started out this journey, I'd have snapped your hand off, right? Yes, there's more we can do. Yes, there is more we are going to do to improve things. And I, personally won't be happy until that's like an 8 or a 9.
Yeah.
But we're reaching the stage now where it's not necessarily marginal gains, but some of those things are going to be harder to eke out.
Yeah. I think when you're getting into 8, 9 area, that's hard to calculate to begin with. So I think where you're at is pretty fantastic for the time period, to be frank. I do want us to share a little bit of love with the listeners in terms of, this is why we love procurement. What has been the best piece of advice, maybe from a mentor or a leader or even yourself to your team, that you heard and that you shared, that you would be pertinent to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, great question. Right. So the thing which was shared with me by a colleague, gosh, maybe like 20 years ago when I was starting out on this journey, was she said, in the tough times, always make sure you look over your shoulder and see where you've come from. Right. And by that, I assumed that she meant, right? It's really easy to get bogged down in the challenges of today and think somehow this isn't going to work, or oh, how am I going to do it, or whatever. Draw strength in what you've achieved already, right? Look at how hard some people said something else was going to be, and look how ultimately they came to like it, or at least not to loathe it, right? Depending on what you're talking about. I think that is really important to draw that out.
I love that advice. I love that advice. It's always coming from people 20 years ago that somehow stick in our mind. For me, I would have, a mentor probably 16 years ago now, and there's one thing that they would tell me that would stick in my head. But I really, really like the idea of looking behind. I don't think I do that very well. So I appreciate you sharing that with all of us today. I think we all could do that a little bit better, and realize like a 6 or a 7 or where we're at now is absolutely fantastic. And we need to remember where we came from in the past to get there, what all we went through to get there. So I really appreciate you taking the time,
And the,
Karl. Is there
and the other thing
anything
which
else you would like to share with the audience today before we hop off?
do you know what? I have really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much, Katie. Really appreciate your time as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and we will catch you on the next segment of Love Procurement.